This is Jay Martin.
Okay, I want to double back here, and I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate because I guess I'm going to ask the questions that constantly or often get asked to me and I'm trying to understand the answers to better. So look, we pay property tax in exchange for a system that guarantees this asset is ours, right? That sort of documents our ownership, all this stuff. Yes, that could be replaced by a technology like Bitcoin or blockchain in terms of demonstrating that this asset is actually mine. But when it comes to enforcing that, right, that's what we really pay for, right? Because in the world, as you said, there's makers and takers, and there's always going to be both, right? So for the makers who are victims of the takers, what do they get? Like how do they replace that property tax fee they pay in exchange for enforcement of the law that says, yeah, that's your house, everybody knows it, but you still need somebody with arms to show up and enforce if there's somebody squatting on your land. So how is that system replaced? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you can have defense and security. We have it go to any nightclub, right? They have bouncers.
Yeah.
They're not government officials. Right? You can have private security. A lot of
for those who can afford it, though. But what about the makers that can't afford to protect themselves from the takers?
Well, if your property is only yours to the extent that you can defend it. This is a key point. So if you can't afford to defend physical property from takers, then you probably shouldn't be holding physical property. You should probably be holding something that's really hard to take.
I'm with you. And I guess the common response that I would get to that statement and that you must is that yeah, but we've come a long way. We should look out for each other. We're better than that, right? Look at all this abundance we've created. Is there not some sense of community that we should be pooling together? Like, how do you?
It's that type of naivete that gets preyed upon. So when people say, "Oh, we should do this," we should There's one thing in freedom maximalism I often tell people is don't should all over yourself,
right? Yeah.
Because shoulds don't matter. What is should? Maybe we should, right? We should all love one another. We should all, in my opinion, try to exemplify the consciousness and lifestyle of someone like Christ or Buddha. We should. But do we? No, we don't. So I don't think that's a viable, it just doesn't work. If you think that people are going to reconfigure themselves based on your opinion or your shoulds or your moralizing, I don't think we're living in the same universe. And we'll see whose strategy actually works. The point is quite simply that if coercion is profitable, someone will engage in it. So the key, like the things we're describing here, the US Constitution, the decentralized republic, Bitcoin, these all make coercion less profitable. They make coercion riskier, right? It's risky to break into someone's house and steal their stuff.
Yeah.
Right. It's potentially very profitable. You just need to spend one night's work and maybe you get their, watches or jewels or whatever. There's a big profit margin of potential, but there's a big risk attached to that with this legal apparatus. So again, it's contributed towards the advancement of individual sovereignty, but the core theme is, what does this system or technology do to the profitability of coercion? So, said another way, the more expensive we can make property to violate, the more people are incentivized to engage in making and not taking. You're basically driving down the profit margin of taking through technology, through socioeconomic systems. So the key point with physical defense is that you don't need a monopoly on violence, which is the state, is not the sole possible producer of security. And I understand that not everyone can afford private security, but this is kind of a conundrum too, because the reason people can't afford that there's not more wealth in the world is because the defender of property is so aggressively preying on property. So it's inhibiting aggregate wealth creation. And on this point, again, it may sound crazy, it may sound overblown, but go read Mises, go read Rothbard, go read Ayn Rand. I mean, there's a long, long history of this libertarian philosophy on this exact phenomenon we're going through again today.
Mm.
And this isn't empirical even. This isn't like we have observed this throughout history, but that's not the foundation for this argument. The foundation for this argument is economic rationalism. Like, for the same reason that people prefer satisfaction sooner rather than later, all things held equal, right? If you're going to sell me on, if you're going to sell me on accepting a satisfaction to my want later, I'm going to need more satisfaction. I need some compensation for the risk.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? This is the interest rate, frankly. At what rate am I interested in receiving capital now versus later?
Yeah. Yeah. Hold up, quick interruption to shout out one of our partners here at the Jay Martin Show. This is Masterworks. Now, Masterworks is a platform that gives retail investors like you or I the opportunity to fractionally own pieces of blue chip art. So we're talking about Picasso, Monet, Banksy, etc. Now, why is this exciting? Because the smartest money that I have on my show invests in the art sector. So I want to do that too. Now, last year, I actually bought 2 pieces of art for my home. But knowing nothing about the art industry, I have no idea how they're actually going to appreciate over time. Now, I like them, and maybe that's enough. But if I want to put my cash to work in the art sector, I really want to go after the biggest names in the business, the multi-million-dollar pieces. And this is the access that Masterworks gets you. So check out masterworks.io now. Let me like pull on something here. So when you answer my question, you talked about kind of this fallacy utopia that we would love to live in, or some people would love to live in, but it's just not realistic. And right away, where I went with that was like, we tend to forget that very recently we were wild animals, and we're so domesticated now that we just have a different expectation about what life should provide to us, right? And this, I think, is a trend that is accelerating, and we watch it manifest in our fear of discomfort, whether that realizes itself in like censorship and cancel culture. But like, if this offends me, we need to protect ourselves from it and get rid of it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a disturbing trend, right? But it's one that we're watching just amplify in front of us. And so is this, like, I kind of wonder, is this society breaking, right? The world tends to break about every 10 years, right? And are we getting to a place now, these massive political divides, civil unrest, et cetera, but just a lack of communication between any opposite viewpoints. And I look at the safetyism trend as quite dangerous. And I wonder, how do you remind people that we're actually very resilient, anti-fragile, tough species, right?
I was having a long conversation with a good friend of mine yesterday about this. And, he kind of takes this position, I'm not going to name his name, but that a lot of this is just really Darwinian. It's very much natural selection, that certain things that people are being coerced into, it's kind of like a test of your critical thinking. And if you give in to the coercion, right, and you accept the mandate, whatever it may be, then you've kind of failed the test. And that's what's going on here, right? There are groups of people that understand we're all running cognitive software, and we're all programmable ultimately to some extent.
Sure.
And there are a cadre of people that will engage in attempts, many forms of attempts to try and program people in a way that supports their agenda or vision. And then if you're talking about people being, one of the core ways to be sovereign, in my opinion, is to realize that you are a human being running cognitive software and you are programmable, right? You get this metacognitive realization, and then you're like, oh, so now I can choose which books to read. I can choose who to spend time with. I can choose which lines of business to be in. I can program myself. Mm-hmm. And physically too, right? It's kind of like working out. What kind of exercise you engage in is what type of body you build. Well, what type of cognitive training you do turns out what kind of mind you build. So you can control yourself. And so his position on all this is that the hand of those that would seek to program and control others has kind of been forced in the digital age, because we used to have very effective top-down media model, right? There's just a few channels. A lot of the large capital groups, which I would just refer to as shareholders of central banks, tend to own most of those media outlets. So they control the narrative that's being promulgated. Well, what they don't see coming, and this is what often changes human history very sharply, is technology, right? New technology emerges, a new technological landscape emerges that those in power, they could control the old model, they cannot control the new model. And so this creates all this discombobulation that I think we're going through today. It kind of forces their hand too. So I think a lot of this COVID hysteria, state over response, overreach, I always point people to the book, The Sovereign Individual. You've probably heard me mention this if you've ever watched any of my episodes. I think I mentioned it in almost every episode. It was a book written in 1997 that had made a number of remarkable and accurate predictions. One of which, the main thesis of the book really, is that software would eat the state, that the emergence of things like anonymous digital cash and encrypted communications and social media, all of these things would disempower the state's control over people. And indeed, I think that's what we're going through. So it's, it can get a little tinfoil hat-ish, but if you look over the past 2 years, people wearing the tinfoil hats have been relatively spot on. And you mentioned, one other thing you mentioned was, the world breaking every 10 years. This is not normal. When we had, periods of sound money, we'd have many decades of peace, prosperity, cultural flourishing. This accelerated breakdown in call it socioeconomic volatility, is driven largely by the central bank. This is the Austrian business cycle theory. You can read about this. This is one of Mises's crowning achievements. He wrote about it in the 1940s. He predicted everything we're going through today, not from an empirical standpoint, again, from a logically deduced argument, that if you start to break down the currency, you're going to accelerate the booms and busts of the market cycle until you reach one of two inevitable endpoints. One is deflationary collapse back to economic reality. So you stop distorting price signals and you let the market reset, clear the errors. Or two, which is the one typically reached, is hyperinflation of the currency. You have to keep debasing the currency more and faster to keep the debt structure in place until the whole thing breaks down. And when we look at both the precedent and the incentives of central banks, they tend to engage in monetary debasement to the point of hyperinflation. So, and this was all summed up really good in a tweet I saw the other day. And it said, millennials are currently looking at the third, quote unquote, once in a lifetime financial crises. Right? We had 2008, we had 2020, and here we are staring down the barrel of a gun again in another massive, quote unquote, once in a lifetime financial recession.
Sure.
It's all bullshit. The more governments intervene in markets, the less effective markets are at creating wealth, the more volatile they are, the more uncertain they are, the more chaotic life becomes. It's really that simple. So that's why I take an absolute stance on freedom. I really think if you maximize the integrity of life, liberty, and property, everything else sorts itself out.
Well, let's get actionable with that then, Robert. What are you doing in your personal life right now to increase your personal sovereignty?
I buy Bitcoin every single day. I buy dips, price dips, and I never sell. Now, I'm also very intrigued with the idea of 3D printed weapons. I think the idea that guns have now become code, self-defense is now open source code to some extent. That's a very liberating force. I think privacy technologies of all kinds are very useful. The more illegible you can make yourself to the state, right? The state needs you to be inside of a box and to be very traceable. All of your actions, all of your spending, all of everyone you engage with, the more traceable and trackable you are, the more taxable you are. So the more you can privatize your life, anonymize yourself and your affairs, the better off you are. And there's a whole, I mean, privacy is its own rabbit hole, right? You could check out Jameson Lopp. I think it's lopp.net, lopp.net. He's a long time Bitcoiner. He has a lot of resources on that page, but he's got a whole page dedicated to privacy tech. It's really interesting. I've spent, as I mentioned to you offline, spent the past 2 years traveling, really trying to stake out a good place in the world to be. I wanted to be in a place that has a very non-compliant culture. I think this is very important to resist this programming that states try to impose upon you. Like I was in LA when COVID hit, and LA is it's a very compliant culture. And they've been very negatively affected by COVID and all the associated regulations, as is New York City.
Yeah.
I'm currently in Costa Rica, and people don't buy into that down here. I would also say the American South. When I was traveling, I'm from Tennessee, so I'm very biased. But places like Tennessee, Texas, the South, everyone knew that all the COVID hysteria was exactly that, just hysteria. And again, from just a pure cost benefit standpoint, I think you want to be in places and around people that are just more expensive to tyrannize. That will be a good strategy to protect yourself going into the decades ahead.
That's interesting. And, it's, when you say that, I'm like, I go to the United States, right? And I think about, like, I've traveled a lot through the US in the last year, and my family's dual. We've actually had really in-depth discussions about what's our line, like what's going to push us south of the border. And if so, where would we go? And what I love about America as a Canadian is the sovereignty of the states, right? I've been to, just in the last year, like Louisiana, Mississippi, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, New York, Texas, Arizona. And every single time you cross a state line, it's a whole new style of risk management, right? When it comes to this specific risk, which I love, because you can kind of choose your own adventure, right? Take it to a grander scale, sure, leave the country, explore Central, South America, Europe, wherever. Now, when you say what do you say? It was complicated to impose restrictions on freedoms. I'm not getting how you said it, but that's essentially what you said. Now, is that in a place like Costa Rica, is that because of challenges in the communication system? Like, I know in the States, the right to bear arms, I think, protects a lot of freedoms, right? It's why certain states are able to, hold their own and say, we're not going to follow every mandate, and good luck trying to push us. Whereas if you go to a more developed nation, is it the breakdown in communication and policing, or what's the?
Well, it's a lot of factors, clearly. I think, and I'm not deeply knowledgeable on Costa Rican history, for instance, but I'm pretty sure they're one of the only countries with no standing military. And essentially they've outsourced all of their geographic security to the United States.
Yeah.
There's also the area that I'm in, the roads are very underdeveloped. Like, they're bumpy, rugged roads. So people aren't traveling 70 miles an hour up and down the roads around here. People are on ATVs and motorcycles going 20 miles an hour. And there's a lot of, we're near the water, but there's also a lot of mountainous, a lot of varied topography, let's say.
Yep.
And there's a culture of, I don't know if this is, it's a very cosmopolitan culture, but it just seems like expats, for instance, have been coming here for 2 or 3 decades. So they kind of like carved out this little niche of a tropical place to go get away to, and there just seems to be very low government intervention overall. So it's very free market, frankly. And so culture matters, topography matters, conditioning, right? We talked about this. If everyone's programmable, then culture kind of becomes like this distributed software layer. You're plugging into it, right? When you move into another culture, well, there's a reason everything's so different, and you have to adapt and adjust because people are running a slightly different software package than you are. So you now have to adapt yourself to the new culture. And if you're in a culture like LA, where people just, And I mean, my argument here, I think Balaji said this really well, that when you remove God, when you remove that from the socioeconomic fabric, it's like, nature abhors a vacuum, or power likes to fill a vacuum. It's like people start to put GOV where we used to hold GOD.
Yeah. All right.
And you see that in LA and New York. They just unquestioningly accept whatever is told to them.
Yeah.
Yes, tell me how many masks, how many jabs,
Yeah.
how long do I need to stay home?
Yeah.
Whatever you say. And that is what I'm trying to get as far away from as possible. I just don't want to be around. That's mass psychosis right there.
Yeah. I'm
People
with you.
not thinking for themselves, people just towing the party line, doing what they're told. I don't want to be anywhere near that.
Sure. I'm with you, man. And
So,
it's funny how watching culture develop in Canada over the last 2 years has been really disheartening, because I've always enjoyed living in such a passive country, right? Like, we don't have a lot of chaos at the political level ever. It's pretty quiet up here. However, maybe as a consequence of that, like, the onboarding to every mandate has been, I would say, very extreme. And I found myself to be an extraordinary outlier as a consequence, which is a frustrating place to live, right? Because
yeah.
I feel like a bit of a castaway, right? Which is why my wife and I have been having the conversations about when, what's our line, right? And I've never felt fearful about the future of our nation, but I absolutely do today, and I look at the individual in charge, and I just find that all sorts of new precedents have been set. And we have a tendency to look at actions like this as like something that happened and not look at them as trajectories. All right. Like, the precedent that's been set, the door's now open, right, for all variety of terrifying situations in my experience. Okay. I want to pull on your Bitcoin comment. You said I buy Bitcoin every day and I never sell it. And so what's the bet you're making there, Robert? Because let me tell you my Bitcoin strategy and then share yours. So I'm not the same, but I'm similar in that I dollar cost average in, and I don't have a sell date, right? I haven't bought Bitcoin for about a year. I just felt like it was getting a bit crazy, and I'm not in the space enough to like try to time prices. I don't do that anyways, but I started buying again this week for the first time in a year. And, I don't have like a what's going to make me sell event, which typically if I buy something, right, I'm a merchant, I buy and sell things in the market or whatever. I know why I buy, so I know why I'll sell. I buy Bitcoin. I'm unclear what would make me sell. I'm just holding for the long term, just in case, to make sure I have a horse in that race. Talk to me about what you're doing.
Well, the proximate bet on Bitcoin. I mean, look, first thing I should say is I don't want to be prescriptive to anyone ever about what they should buy or hold or save. This is not financial advice, all the traditional caveats, but I actually mean it. Because if you just buy something on my advice, well, you don't have any conviction in that asset. So as soon as the price does something weird, either goes way down or goes way up, you're probably going to sell it. And so what I always suggest, the first step to building a portfolio is to just build a worldview, right? Educate yourself, and then let your portfolio construction be a reflection of your actual conviction, right? What do you actually believe is going on in the world? And you can listen to people, right? You can listen to other opinions, but you should assimilate multiple opinions and then come to your own conclusion, right? Don't blindly follow any individual. So all that said, I think the general, and this is what I try to go into on the show, is the first principles of money, the nature of money, how it works, how it's evolved historically, and where I think it's evolving today. And that's many hundreds of hours of content we've put out on the show. It's not an easy topic. It touches everything in world history. It has a lot of psychological implications. So I wouldn't even know where to begin here at the last few minutes, but I would just say this, that the temptation to print money is so wholly overwhelming and irresistible to people that we just have always given into it. And when you add to the fact that money printing early on, it's like very much like a drug, and that it has this stimulative effect, right? If the economy is in recession and people aren't working, there aren't investments, the trading is not taking place. Well, if you just throw some more liquidity into that market, that's going to create some activity, right? People are going to do some stuff and the money's going to move. but it also creates this misallocation of capital. And again, back to Mises boom and bust, Austrian business cycle theory, that's what he described. So it is very much like a drug, and that it has these, marginally beneficial effects at first, but very quickly you get addicted and you need more and more money printing to create a smaller and smaller result. So just like when you go out and have a drink at night, the first, whatever your number, 2, 3, 4 beers feels great. And then you get to some tipping point and 5, 6, 7 aren't quite as good, whatever your number is. Printing money is very much the same. It's addictive and it has diminishing returns. So the bet on owning Bitcoin is essentially that human beings are going to keep being human. We're going to keep printing money. We're going to keep engaging in this self-deceptive act that we think printing money can solve real economic problems. And it's a flat out delusion. You cannot violate property rights of others to solve real economic problems in any systemic way. And that bet has been a really good one, especially over the past 2 years, where we've engaged in unprecedented post-wartime money supply expansion. And it's, again, it doesn't slow down, it accelerates. You have to keep printing exponentially more to get the same effects. And especially now that we're at this point where money is being handed out, right? This is happening in various countries around the world where we're talking about giving people universal basic income, right? Yeah. Free money forever. All this stuff leads to one place and one place only, and that is the hyperinflation of whatever fiat currency it is. And so I think over the next I have a public prediction by the year 2035, the US dollar is hyperinflated to zero. And in a world where the US dollar is hyperinflated to zero, Bitcoin goes to infinity in dollar terms. Now, what does that actually mean? It means that you stop thinking in dollars, you stop pricing in dollars. Bitcoin disrupts all other monies, it disrupts gold, all fiat currencies, all alternative stores of value, and it becomes the premier asset. Because again, it's the one untouchable private property right in the world. It's the only thing that I can hold my wealth in that's independent of everyone else's opinion. No one can change the rules. No one can take it from me. Mm-hmm. No one knows how much I have. It's just independent private wealth. And I think that value proposition is extremely important in a world where governments are just increasingly desperate, increasingly insolvent, and therefore increasingly overreaching, oppressive, heavy-handed in taxation, heavy-handed in inflation. The world's going to get really ugly, I think, before it gets better. And Bitcoin is essentially a lifeboat to the other side.
Oh man, there's so many threads on there I want to pull on. I know we're bumping up against the clock. So what I'm going to do instead, actually, because on your when you speak about private money and wealth, immediately, my background, 12 years ago when I started in the market was all in the precious metal sector. That's how I cut my teeth. And investing in gold, I still own physical gold. I think people should own both Bitcoin and gold. But your episode with Lawrence Lepard, it's episode number 173 on the What is Money podcast. That's Robert's podcast. Go check it out. It's excellent. And if I would suggest an episode to start with, I would start with that one, because phenomenal conversation and absolutely worth your time. Lawrence is a legend and came from the precious metals investing space. And now he's transitioned, money manager investor. Now he's looking at the crypto space. And I love that, because there's a lot of like evangelical sentiment in both gold and Bitcoin. And so it's nice, to hear the moderates come out and say, here's what I'm seeing and here's why I'm shifting my focus or adding this to my portfolio, and very valuable. Yeah,
Lawrence is great. And he, Bitcoiners are just gold bugs with better technology. And Lawrence is one of those guys that crossed the chasm and understands that. But all the same principles apply. All the things gold bugs have been fighting for decades. The same things Bitcoiners are fighting for. It's the same conversation, 100%. It's the same conversation I was hearing 12, 15 years ago, from silver bugs and gold bugs. The values and the culture is it's the same. It's the same. It's remarkable.
All right. Look, Robert, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Again, check out the What is Money podcast. That's Robert's show. And I'd love to do this again sometime, but have fun in Costa Rica.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I really appreciate it. It's whatismoneypodcast.com. I think you could also find me on Twitter at Breedlove22. Yeah, I live to talk about this and educate about this. I've made this kind of my life's work. So feel free to reach out and engage.
All right, thank you for watching this interview. Now, 3 things before I let you go. Number 1, I publish a weekly newsletter and I love writing it. I share my biggest takeaways and action items from the conversations that I have on this channel. In addition, my thoughts on current events, economic events, political events, and you can subscribe for free. Just hit the pinned comment right beneath this video, or just go to jmartin.club and you can subscribe on the website. I'd love to have you join the team. Number 2, ad revenue from this channel is donated to an organization that is super close to my heart called Zero Ceiling. Now, Zero Ceiling's mission is to end youth homelessness, and the way they do this is by giving at-risk urban youth the opportunity to relocate to beautiful wilderness areas and then provide them with supportive housing, career training, and just generally positive influences on their life. I love what they do. Check them out if you're interested. And number 3, if you prefer to listen to my content as opposed to watch it, you can find me wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search for The Jay Martin Show. All right, thanks again.